Have you tried to lose weight by diet and exercise and your weight is still much higher than you'd like it to be? Are you experiencing health challenges and impaired quality of life because of your weight? There is hope. Stand by. Go Healthy for Good starts right now. Hello and welcome to Go Healthy for Good. There are so many theories on the best way to lose weight. One option is to have bariatric surgery for a quick fix, or is it? We'll find out on today's show. First, meet Paul, who moved from a low-income country to a high-income country, and his weight followed suit.
As a teenager, my parents were missionaries in Papua New Guinea. And up to the age of 16, I lived in New Guinea and I was a fit, healthy, normal teenager. And I came back to boarding school in New Zealand and I felt quite lonely at boarding school. And I had a job working in the kitchen as potboy in the kitchen. And that gave me access to as much food as I wanted to eat. And I capitalised on that. And I went from probably about 68 kilos up to about 85 kilos during that period that a couple of years I was at Longburn. Maintained around that level. When I got married, just under the age of 30, I was around 95 kilos. And then slowly, after 20 years after that, the weight crept up until I got to the point where I was about 115 kilos. Just going skiing with the kids. I'd get through till about 11:30, 12 o'clock, and we'd stop for lunch, and the kids would go out in the afternoon skiing, and I'd say, no, I've had enough, I'll stay here and wait for you. I was working as a church pastor, and the bulletin secretary used to put photos of different people each week in the bulletin. And one week she put a photo of me, and I actually looked at that photo and I thought, oh my golly, that's getting pretty serious. We need to start doing something about that. You try and lose weight and it doesn't work, and you try and lose weight and it doesn't work, and you try and lose weight and it doesn't work. And you get to the point where you're sitting down talking to someone and you try and cross your legs and you can't cross your legs because your legs are too big to cross over. You start to reflect negatively on my self-image. Wondered how much longer I was going to be able to keep going, starting to get into some health issues. And so, it wasn't a particularly good point to be at. And I was starting to get major health issues. My blood pressure was 160 on 120. My cholesterol level was up to about 8.5, which is very, very high. Blood sugar levels was borderline type 2 diabetes. And so the doctor said to me, Paul, we're going to have to start putting you onto some serious medication. And I didn't want to go onto some of the medication at that stage. So that's when we made the decision I made the decision, because it had to be my decision, that I was going to make some lifestyle changes.
And he'll share those changes later in the show. Meanwhile, we'll meet a surgeon who helps people make those changes in a rather different way. And if you want a very yummy soup recipe, then stick around. But right now, let's kick it off with the news. In the headlines today, polycystic ovarian syndrome and diabetes linked. It's what we eat and how we eat it, and bariatric surgery costly and cost-effective. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS, affects up to 10% of women of reproductive age. Of these, 50 to 80% will have obesity and might also have diabetes and cardiovascular disease. In order to study the interaction of obesity and PCOS with the development of type 2 diabetes, researchers analysed 23 studies involving 60,000 women with PCOS, of whom 8,850 had a combination of both PCOS and type 2 diabetes. Women with PCOS who also had obesity were 3 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes, whereas lean women with PCOS were not. So if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, be vigilant to keep your weight under control and you'll keep the diabetes at bay. Enjoying meals with loved ones reduces obesity and improves the health of adolescents. Families in Spain with kids aged 12 to 16 were interviewed to find out the frequency, location and duration of family meals. They were also asked about the use of digital devices at meal times, the preparation of food, and the type of communication going on across the table. They discovered that communication and socialisation were an important part of family meals, and that there was less adherence to a healthy Mediterranean diet if less time was spent over meals, if the meal was not eaten at the table, if digital devices distracted from meaningful dialogue, or if the conversation was not pleasant. These findings are consistent with previous studies that showed that eating together as a family is related to a healthier diet with more fruits and vegetables and less sugary drinks. So in a world that is cancelling the family, let's keep family traditions alive with one meal a day, eaten together to converse, communicate, and collaborate. 5 different weight management programs were compared to no intervention for effectiveness and cost effectiveness by the Health Economics Research Unit in the UK. The long-term risks of obesity-related diseases and cost effectiveness of different treatments were simulated using systematic review and meta-analysis of randomised controlled trials. Bariatric surgery was the most expensive intervention, but in the long term resulted in the lowest incidence of obesity-related diseases and ongoing costs. However, if surgery was not affordable, the next best investment was a low-intensity, 12-week behavioural intervention weight management program. I'm Dr. Nerida McKibben, and that's today's health news. Our guest today is Dr. Nigel Rajaratnam, a surgeon with a special interest in bariatric surgery. I asked him how much bariatric surgery helps with metabolic diseases.
Bariatric surgery helps in multiple ways. One of it is the effect on the body system itself, and also the effect the weight has when you lose that weight. Effects on body systems would include diabetes, so resolution of diabetes, resolution or improvement in blood pressure or cholesterol. In addition to that, we find that patients with fertility issues, for example, can overcome those issues with weight loss. With absolute weight loss itself, issues such as sleep apnea, we find that patients improve on their sleep apnea in a sense that they don't even have to use CPAP machines anymore, for example. Joint pain, stress incontinence from a urinary point of view, and etc.
Those are life-changing things,
Yes.
if you can get rid of diabetes. So how do you select your patients? Who's suitable for bariatric surgery?
The patients generally who are suitable almost straight away are those with a BMI above 40. So BMI is a body mass index, which is weight over meters squared. We find those over 40 generally will have significant improvement with bariatric surgery. However, we also find patients on BMI of 35, but with medical conditions that bariatric or weight has effect on will also improve. So this would be diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol issues, or issues with sleep apnea or joint pains.
So now there's quite a bit of counselling goes into that pre-op period for people. What does that involve?
The counselling in the preoperative period is very much multidisciplinary. So it's very important. No patient has bariatric surgery in most practices without being seen by the team. And the team would comprise of a bariatric surgeon, a nurse specialist, a nutritionist or dietitian, and also a psychologist. In addition to that, there are also other paramedical staff associated with that, which would include a physiotherapist or a personal trainer, for example. And they're very important at guiding the patient through the preoperative phase of their journey towards weight loss surgery.
Particularly interested in what the nutritionist and the psychotherapy does. So the psychologist, tell us what will the nutritionist do?
So the nutritionist sees the patient. They take a nutrition history or a food history. They sort of start advising the patient on the do's and don'ts, even in the weight loss period. So that's when they tell them no complex carbohydrates, try to avoid sugary drinks, try to avoid snacking if possible. And they also offer alternatives to unhealthy foods or snacks. And they also give the patient some idea or healthy meal plan diets in the preoperative period. But importantly, the nutritionist also is in charge of starting the very low calorie diet. This is the diet the patient is put on prior to having bariatric surgery. This diet is very important because it helps us shrink the liver prior to an operation, which makes the operation a lot safer.
Right. And safety is a big component of, because operating on a heavy person has its serious risks. Tell us about the psychologist, what input they have.
The psychologist deals with the patient from a mind point of view, because we know very much bariatrics or weight loss issues are body. However, a lot of importance is also placed on the mind, because patients sometimes are perhaps having issues that they're dealing with stress eating, for example, or grazing, for example, and the nutritionist is important. The psychologist is important with that. They try to understand that and trying to give the patient some tips and behavioral therapy, lifestyle exercises to try and help delineate what's going on and hopefully overcome that. The nutritionist is also very important because they are very good at picking out patients who perhaps have issues with addiction, because addictive personalities can give you quite a lot of issues if you're having bariatric surgery, because there's something called addiction transfer. So if the patient, for example, is addicted to food, we find that the patient may, perhaps when they're not addicted to food anymore after the surgery, they find that transfer addiction goes to something else. So that could be alcohol or drugs or gambling, and that's something certainly we don't want to see. And we try to pick that out prior to the operation.
When we come back from the break, Melinda has a special treat for us in the kitchen, and there's a whole lot more from Dr. Nigel, so stay with us.
I want to share with you one of my favourite soups. It's called glowing lentil soup, and it's basically a pantry soup, which means apart from the garlic and ginger and onion, which you probably have in your fridge most of the time, everything else is things that you'd find in your pantry. So you can have the stock there all the time. The first thing we need to do is put in our onion. So in a fairly hot pot, a little bit of oil, and put in the onion, so chopped onion. And I'm also going to add the garlic. So try to keep that heat fairly low. You just want the garlic and the onion to kind of simmer down. I'm going to grate in probably about a tablespoon of ginger. The ginger really, really adds to the flavour of the soup. Just very aromatic. So the onion is starting to become soft, and our garlic is going a nice golden colour. Now before I add our liquid stock, I'm actually going to put in our other seasonings. So we've got cumin, some cardamom, a little bit of cinnamon, just a tiny bit. Cinnamon you'd think wouldn't go in a soup, but it tastes beautiful. The combination with the cinnamon is gorgeous. A little bit of Celtic salt. It's a good idea to taste it again later to see if you have enough salt added, but I just start with a little bit, about half a teaspoon, and some turmeric. Turmeric's going to give this a beautiful golden glow, the soup. Okay, now I'm going to add my 1 litre of vegetable stock. And we're going to put in our red lentils. So these are an excellent source of protein, lots of fibre. We're going to put in a can of crushed tomatoes and stir those through. Before we add the coconut cream, we really just want that soup to come to a simmer and to bubble a little bit, turn it down until all of those little red lentils have gotten nice and fat and puffy. Probably about another 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes. Our red lentil soup is nice and thick now. You can see that all the little red lentils have all gotten quite fat and they're starting to break down, which is a good indication that they're ready, almost ready to serve. So just before we serve, we're going to pour in the coconut, 1 can of coconut cream, and stir that through. And this makes it into a really beautiful, creamy yellow colour. And then we're going to wilt in 150 grams of spinach leaves. This recipe has a really good level of iron in it with the spinach and also iron in the red lentils. But to make the iron even more bioavailable, we're actually going to add a little bit of lime. So the vitamin C in the lime juice will help the iron in the spinach and the red lentils be much more easily absorbed into your body. So we're ready to serve. And there's our beautiful bowl of glowing red lentil soup. And just to finish it off, some lime wedges. And just drizzle the lime juice over the top. Really adds to the flavour too, the zestiness in the lime, even if you squeeze the skin a little bit and get that in with the juice as well. It's delicious. Perfect on a really cool winter night when you just want to curl up and eat something really, really nourishing and very satisfying. Enjoy.
I love red lentils and I love soup, so that's 2 thumbs up from me. Paul grew up as a missionary kid in Papua New Guinea. At 16, he flew to New Zealand to go to boarding school where he got a job in the kitchen. Access to lots of food meant lots of comfort eating. His weight went from 68 kilos to 85 kilos in 2 years, and eventually in his 40s it edged on up to 115 kilos. That's 253 pounds. Of course, hypertension, cholesterol and borderline diabetes came along for the ride. His doctor recommended medications, but as a health professional, Paul knew better. Watch.
In theory, weight loss is real easy. In practice, it's not quite that easy. But a couple of things we did was, for the first 3 months while I was on long service leave, counted the calories quite religiously. But there's some ways to really help with that. And one is by going to the whole food, plant-based diet, you can eat a lot more volume of food with reducing the calorie density of that food quite dramatically. So the change to the whole food plant-based diet really helped. The other thing that helped was making a point of getting regular exercise. And then some things that helped with the actual eating pattern was to have regular meals. Initially, the exercise was walking. And look, when I was at 115 kilos with the height that I am, anything more strenuous than walking, had joint problems. So initially it was walking, and it was a matter of going out with my wife and with the kids, walking where we were. And then I started to get really serious about bird watching. So going out walking to find the different birds was great. And then as I lost weight, got fitter, started to do a little bit of jogging, but then started cycling, really enjoyed the cycling. After about 4 weeks, it started to feel really good because the weight was coming off, my blood pressure was starting to come down. I was starting to get a lot more energy than I'd ever had before. You go through phases. The first 3 months, we managed to get fairly consistent weight loss, but then you plateau, and that happens when you look at the scientific literature. That happens with everyone losing weight, anyone making lifestyle changes. But it was a matter of sticking with it. And then it plateaued for about 6 weeks, and then the weight started to come off and the health improvement. And it was great to be able to go back to the ski field and actually spend the whole day skiing with the kids and competing with the kids. They got a bit older now, so I can't keep up with them, but we can still ski all day long. Now, my main exercise is walking, and 3 or 4 times a week I go out bird photography. And my wife and I make a habit of trying to go for a walk most evenings. And that's good for exercise. It also gives the two of us time to debrief and connect with each other and see how the day's gone for each other. So it has multiple benefits. I actually lost weight in 2005, so that's going back 15 years ago now, 16 years ago. And losing weight is doable. And before that, I used to say to people, I've lost tons of weight, but you put it all back on again. But after the weight loss, I actually did a PhD looking at lifestyle modification, lifestyle changes. And it was really interesting when you go and look at the literature, you say, oh yeah, that's what I was doing, you know. One of them is the whole food, plant-based diet, being consistent with that. The other thing that's really important with maintaining weight loss, and it has been for me too, is make sure you have breakfast. Because if you don't have breakfast, you get through till about 10 o'clock in the morning and you start feeling hungry and you start grabbing biscuits and cakes and just to fill up. So the breakfast was really important. And having regularity of meals, trying to have the meals at the same time. Another key factor is making sure you get enough sleep so that you're coping with, it helps you to cope with the changes in your diet, the weight loss. The exercise is really good. It has enormous benefits for the body, but as far as actual weight loss is concerned, it's actually the most important factor there is controlling the amount that you eat. And that's where things like having breakfast, consistent meals, being careful and being aware of what it is that you're eating is really important. Losing the weight has really been life-changing. Been able to go skiing for the whole day with the kids and keep up with the kids. Been able to ride a push bike from the bottom of New Zealand to the top of New Zealand. To be able to go hang gliding, which is something I couldn't have done before. It's been absolutely fantastic. And so that's been really good. But the other thing for me is it's opened up for me a whole lot of new opportunities to serve God too. It's been really interesting the way that God's taken me on this journey since I lost weight. And look, you can serve God no matter what your health level is. There's no question about that. But if we optimize our health, we can serve God so much better.
Skiing, hang gliding, cycling, and a rich life of service. That's the good life. Today's guest is a surgeon who helps people lose weight by reducing the size of the stomach. I asked him about the various procedures known as gastric bypass.
Gastric bypass is a few permutations of it. One is called the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, and the other is a loop gastric bypass. Roux-en-Y is very much sort of gold standard that everybody knows and most do. The loop bypass is an up-and-coming bypass operation. They have both what we call a restrictive component and a malabsorptive component. So the restrictive component means they reduce the stomach size. However, the malabsorptive component means that they also reduce the amount of small bowel that's being used to absorb nutrients.
So that's where the word bypass comes in. They bypass several meters of small bowel?
Correct. Yes, exactly. And it varies from surgeon to surgeon, but generally about 2 meters of small bowel gets bypassed.
Wow. And that's where we absorb all our nutrients, isn't it?
Correct.
So does that bring in a nutritional deficiency risk?
Yes, there are a few cons with bypass surgery, as you were alluding to. One of it is nutritional deficiency. So especially if fat-soluble vitamins, so vitamins A, D, E, and K, other nutrients such as calcium or vitamin B12, again, will need to be supplemented along with iron. And this can be in the form of tablets, bariatric strength tablets that are taken afterwards.
And they'll take that for the rest of their lives?
Correct, yes. And it's very important to ensure that they take that because vitamin deficiencies can be a big issue should they not take these tablets.
How long are they in hospital and what's the recovery period like?
For the bypass, they're in hospital for about 2 to 3 days. And the first day, they'll be having just fluids alone, but they'll be up and walking around. Second day is really just sort of getting used to things, getting used to the scars and the operation and the smaller stomach, for example. But generally, patients go home at day 2. Occasionally, if there are pain issues, they go home at day 3. They're also seen by the physiotherapist who gives them some exercises before they go. And there's a very well thought out post-operative plan with regards to visits, nutritionists, and clinic visits afterwards as well. The patient knows and they will adhere to.
And how long do you follow up those patients?
So we follow up the patients about a year. Surgeons. Yeah,
wow.
And sometimes we see them afterwards as well, depending on the patients. But in that year, we'll see them at 6 weeks. And this varies, but 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and then a year. But again, it's also the nutritionist and the diet and the nurse specialist and the psychologist will see them at different points in time as well. So they must be willing to have follow-up for that year.
And what's the weight loss like during that time?
So for the bypass patients, weight loss is generally in and about 60-70% of excess body weight loss.
So 70% of excess weight is lost within the first
2 years
2
generally.
years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's an important part to bring into both bypass and sleeve, perhaps, that the weight loss is sustained for about 2 years, and it's only a leg up for those 2 years. So the gastric sleeve, again, is it's an operation done laparoscopically, same as a bypass, and these where we tubularize the stomach, so the stomach becomes into a tube. And it's generally regarded as a restrictive procedure, so the stomach size is decreased. However, we also find there's a lot of hormonal or metabolic inputs that are also changed during the sleeve operation. With this sleeve, again, patients do very well. It's a faster procedure to do. It takes less operative time, but the recovery is very similar to a bypass.
And do you still get the malabsorption? Do you still need those supplements of the fat-soluble vitamins, the vitamin B12, calcium, iron and things?
We still suggest the patients take the fat-soluble vitamins or the supplementation. However, not taking it doesn't have as much as an effect if, for example, we had a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. However, we still suggest, and most patients will still take a vitamin supplementation afterwards.
Right.
Because of the amount of food or fat that they are not really absorbing.
Because their whole diet is restricted now. Right. And then I'm presuming the same follow-up and things, but what about the weight loss?
So the weight loss with sleeve has slightly reduced weight loss, about 50 to 60% of excess body weight. These patients have, with the sleeve, there's also one extra thing that could perhaps give them a little bit of trouble, which is actually reflux. So you don't get reflux with the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, but with the sleeve, mainly because of a technical issue with the fact that you've got two sphincters on either side of the stomach, you actually have a slightly increased risk of having reflux. So patients who have bad gastric reflux or acid reflux prior to the operation, we generally counsel them to have a bypass instead.
Okay, so that's how you might advise people and select which procedure to do.
Correct.
Now, you mentioned weight loss to 2 years. What happens after that?
After that 2 years, we find that the body sort of catches up. The body adapts and the small bowel adapt and the stomach will adapt, and we find those hormones signals start to fire again and patients can start to gain weight. And generally, we always say that this is only a leg up. Any sort of weight loss surgery is only to help you for the first 2 years. In those first 2 years, the patient should try to institute some healthy eating habits, get good exercise down, reduce snacking, and all those good things that we want to get. And together with getting ahead of the body, the patient hopefully will be able to do well.
So that's when they really need to focus on lifestyle change and just embrace that and make that part of their lives.
Correct, yes.
So that then they have like insurance that that weight loss that they've got will continue.
Correct,
yeah.
Yes.
So surgery is the adjunct to lifestyle change. More from Dr. Nigel coming right up, so stay with us. And now for your questions. I was in hospital for 3 or 4 weeks with COVID and lost 20 pounds. My health coach says I should gain it all back, but I've only managed to gain back 5. I joined Silver Sneakers to lift weights. I'm a vegan and I need help. I am so sorry to hear that you've been that sick. You've probably lost quite a lot of muscle mass in that 20 pounds, so it's perfect that you're working those muscles to rebuild them at Silver Sneakers. But you'll need to eat some additional calories, preferably fat. For a vegan, that would be a small handful of nuts or seeds at every meal. You could also have half an avocado instead of the nuts and seeds. You can incorporate them into your foods, into your diet. So for example, if you're pouring milk on your cereal, then blend that cup of milk with a 1/4 cup of hemp seeds to give it a protein boost. Or you can add ground seeds onto your cereal and eat it that way. Someone else asked, is peanut butter healthy? Well, peanut butter is such a favourite, but you have to remember it's a concentrated source of nutrition. So 1 cup of roasted peanuts makes about half a cup of peanut butter. And peanuts have been found to be beneficial for heart health, but you need to eat them in moderation. because peanut butter is actually high in saturated fat. Saturated fat's a bit hard on the arteries and on the heart. Of course, fat has twice as many calories as protein and sugar, so just bear that in mind too, so don't overdo it. When you buy your peanut butter, be sure to read the ingredients because you can find sugar, salt, vegetable oil, and sometimes even trans fats in that jar of peanut butter, so know before you buy. Emily called. I'm 75, want to come off my hormone replacement therapy and onto something natural for my bones. I live in assisted living and my diet is not ideal, but I take vitamin supplements to compensate for that. So, Emily, what you want to do is just be sure that you're getting enough protein. Calcium, you want to get 1,200 milligrams a day in your diet and supplement. Vitamin D is a good supplement to help you absorb that calcium. Magnesium will help to reduce bone loss, and you usually would supplement about half as much as you supplement of the calcium. Vitamin K will assist in channeling your calcium supplement to your bones rather than onto your blood vessel walls so you don't get the hardening of the arteries. And then vitamin C can help with collagen because that's the main protein in bone. So plenty of green leafy vegetables is key for extra calcium, magnesium and potassium, and then exercise using weights, walking and moderate impact exercise. So try and get plenty of green leafy vegetables in your diet for that extra calcium, magnesium and potassium. Exercise is important. If you can find some weights and lift weights, be walking and moderate impact. Not high impact, but moderate impact. Thanks for sending those questions. If you have a question, then get in touch using the contact details on the screen. Now let's head outdoors for some sun and see what's on the veggie stand today. Tomatoes contain all of the 4 major carotenoids, alpha and beta carotene, lutein and lycopene, all of which are better absorbed if eaten with the skin on, along with the addition of healthy fats like avocado or olives, which in my opinion is the tastiest way to enjoy them anyway. These carotenoids each have their own benefits, but when combined in food, they have even more power. Tomatoes are loaded with lycopene, which has most antioxidant activity of all the carotenoids, reducing the risk of cancer of the prostate and pancreas. It survives cooking and is concentrated in tomato sauce and pizza and pasta sauces. So keep a jar in the fridge, add it to your cooking whenever you can. The Mediterranean diet is frequently voted the healthiest diet in the world, being associated with less cancer, diabetes and cardiovascular disease. It has an emphasis on tomato-based dishes. One study showed the combination of tomatoes and broccoli slowed the growth of prostate cancer. Now it's tempting to cook with peeled tomatoes, but the skin contains flavonols and improves absorption of the carotenoids. So leave it on because you're not what you eat, you are what you absorb. Bon appetit. Today we're talking with bariatric surgeon Dr. Nigel Rajaratnam. I asked him if there are long-term risks for his patients after undergoing bariatric surgery.
With the sleeve and the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass or the loop gastric bypass, there are effects. They're generally more metabolic related, so related to the perhaps the nutrients that they're not absorbing, for example, calcium or iron. But again, this can be sort of ameliorated by the fact that if you take your tablets or your supplementation, you're generally quite well. Both sleeve and bypass again have a few other potential complications. For example, the bypass, you have a slightly higher risk of what we call internal hernia, which doesn't happen to everybody, but if it does happen, may need an operation. And that can happen earlier in the preoperative or postoperative period, or even after, years and years afterwards. There's no really set time, unfortunately.
And how do you tell if you've got that?
If you've got an internal hernia, patients often will know. They have severe abdominal pain, that unable to really sort of get on top of the pain with tablets, and looking very unwell or pale. They occasionally could be vomiting as well. And generally, these are signs that they will need to go to hospital. And these patients would have been counseled specifically about this.
So something to watch for forever, really, after
yes,
that
correct.
surgery. So what's quality of life like after bariatric surgery, let's say after those 1 or 2 years post-op?
Patients do very well post-op. They've got a sort of a new lease on life. They feel lighter, their joints don't hurt, their diabetes is better, your blood pressure control is better. And they find that they can do a lot more, and mood is improved. And it's a lot of positive long-term effects from having bariatric surgery. But the patients have to be open to the idea of wanting to make those changes. And that's something that we stress on very much at the start, that they have to have ownership of this. They need to make those modifications, to exercise, the food changes, and to re-examine their relationship with food. And generally, patients do that, they do very well.
So initially, how much, right immediately after post-op, you're saying they're on a liquid diet. How much can they actually drink, or how does that diet go over time?
So for the liquid diet, for example, they only drink about 30 mils an hour. And it's not very much.
So that's 2 tablespoons.
Correct, not very much at all. And but the liquid diet increases after that. And they usually are able to tolerate about 1.5 liters or so in a day. From there, they go into a pureed diet, which again, usually is about 2 tablespoons and up to maybe 1/4 cupful of food. And that increases as well. The food that they eat generally is going to be very much protein-based for a while. This would include sort of healthy chicken or seafood, for example, or the use of protein powders. We certainly do not suggest patients take carbohydrates in the first year or so.
So for a year, they're off complex carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. And what happens if they have a sugary drink?
So this is something called dumping syndrome, and patients would have been counseled about it beforehand. However, when they have it, they would forget it.
Okay.
It's generally what happens is when they have a high sugary drink or food, for example, like cakes or sweets, the food gets transit very quickly from the now smaller stomach into the now shorter intestine. And now then what happens is with complex insulin release, we find that the patients and other hormones along with that, we find patients get nausea, they get dizzy, they may feel very, very unwell. And generally that's enough for it to happen once. Patients usually don't let it happen again.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine it's not something you'd do to yourself again. Now, before the break, consider this. One day, Jesus was teaching in the temple. He was sitting opposite the treasury, watching people drop their offerings in. The rich came by and they put lots of money in. And then something caught his attention, a widow. She timidly approached the treasury and threw in 2 small copper coins. Jesus immediately said, "Truly, this poor widow has put in more than anyone." His disciples must have wondered what he meant. Everyone else, he said, out of their wealth, put in an offering for God. But she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had, all of her wages. Living paycheck to paycheck, this widow had deprived herself of even the necessities of her life. That's why Jesus could honestly say that she had put in more than anyone. Having given her all, she had stepped out in faith, trusting that God would supply all of her needs, and I'm sure He did. Jesus considered her gift of more value than the large donations that required no self-denial. In God's eyes, the value of our gifts are estimated not by their amount, but by the proportion that we give and the motive of our hearts. And no matter how much we give, we can never outgive God. From every breath we take to the ultimate gift of Jesus' life, we owe Him everything. And our gifts reflect our gratitude. We're talking today about gastric bypass to help with weight loss. I asked our expert guest, bariatric surgeon Dr. Nigel, what his patients may typically be able to eat 1 year after undergoing bypass surgery.
The food will be on a plate. You take about a small serving size plate, and you find that majority of it will be protein based.
So half a cup or a cup?
Probably generally about a cup at about a year's time.
Okay.
Yeah. And then generally, again, decreased amount of carbohydrates, so just more green leafy vegetables, for example, and also peanuts, etc. Beans, lentils.
Yep. Okay. So focus on the protein, and will that 1 cup size meal ever get bigger, or will it always be that small? With
the stomach especially, the stomach is very, very good at adapting. So generally it does increase over time, but it also depends on how much the patient eats to try and distend the stomach as well.
Okay, so it takes effort to make the stomach enlarge.
Correct. But we do usually say, and we have some private practices actually give you a plate with the amount, exactly where you put your protein, your carbohydrates, your fats, your good healthy fats, and usually patients keep to that. You're very good.
Well, that's a good model. And that relationship with food that the psychologist has taken them through, is that fixed usually after they've been all through the surgery and eating such small portions? Is that unhealthy relationship with food usually broken? You can't generally, because they're obviously outliers, but generally patients, I find when I talk to them, they tell me, "Doctor, I'm not hungry anymore." They've sort of lost that interest in food, and they're filling in that interest with good things like exercise and walking and trying to reduce their weight. They find it helpful sometimes to meet other patients who've had bariatric surgery before. Perhaps there's a sense of camaraderie there, and they get a lot very involved. They go out for meals, or they go out for walks, exercises. They just have a starter. They wouldn't have a main meal.
That's right.
If they go out to eat. Yeah.
And they fill that sort of void perhaps the food had with a lot of other things, and generally patients, do very well.
Now back to Paul. Between the ages of 16 and 40, his weight went from 68 to 115 kilos, or 250 pounds. He couldn't keep up with his kids, he had hypertension, high cholesterol, and borderline diabetes. So he got serious, really serious, with a whole food, plant-based diet. He began eating regular meals and started walking every day. His weight came off, and soon he was cycling, skiing, and hang gliding. He even did a PhD in a lifestyle change. Here's his advice. Watch.
A person doesn't get 45 kilos overweight overnight. There's a lot of time. It takes a long time to build up to that. I was weighing 95 kilos when I got married. And from there it built up over a period of about 20 years to 115 kilos. And so that doesn't happen overnight. And similarly, there's reasons why that happens. And so you've got to change those lifestyle things. The other thing I found was a significant factor for me too, is there was emotional reasons, psychological reasons, for want of a better term, of why I overate. For me personally, that actually related back to my relationship with my mother. And as kids, we were never allowed to eat. She used to, don't leave a saucy plate. And if you don't eat your food, all the people in China are really hungry. If you don't eat your food, they're missing out, sort of thing. So there was that sort of psychology that went along to it. And I had to get to the point where I had to say to myself, whether I met up to mum's expectations or not, I don't need to do that. I can be okay in myself without having to meet those demands. And I actually didn't work that through until after my mum died. For me, I ate a lot of food for comfort. If I felt stressed, if I felt lonely, I would start eating. And realising that those were triggers to starting to eat excessively was really helpful in losing the weight and then maintaining that weight loss.
So no matter which way you lose the weight, understanding why you eat, what you eat, when you eat, is integral to the battle of the bulge. And whether you make your lifestyle change with the help of a scalpel or a whole food plant-based diet, success is always dependent on making and maintaining those lifestyle changes. Build your routine, set your boundaries, and stick to them. That's all from me today. Thanks for joining us on Go Healthy for Good. I'll see you next time.